A poem for human beings whose well-being in the global marketplace is why there is a global marketplace. It's not for being my well-being, but for any being on the planet to be in need just shouldn't be. The laws of equilibrium dictate that the political economy will not equilibrate till the wages in Africa are at par with the wages here. Like an invisible hand and an invisible noose, corruption, greed, fear, and hate, they just dissipate. It's a class act, blessed by fate. Hi, welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today is Wednesday, May 13th, 2020. And the poem that I just was reading from, I wrote that a while ago, and I had forgotten that I even had the front half of the poem. Oh, son of a gun. There goes that phone again. Yeah, hello. Yeah, Donald. Donald who? The Donald. Oh, Donald Duck. Didn't I just see you at the Disney World, or was it Disneyland in China? They just reopened the other day? Oh, not Donald Duck. You're the Donald. I see. The Donald. It sounds like rump? No back end for you. Oh, you prefer the front and water sports also. Big fan of water sports, are you? Is it Donald Dump? No. That was the. Oh, I'm sorry. That was Dump Donald was the slogan, not Donald Dump. No, yeah, I got it. I see. It's T, a T, not a D, not an R. It's a T. T for Trump. Didn't I tell you not to call back for a couple of days? We just did this the other day. I don't need this. What do you mean you couldn't control yourself? Well, if you can't control yourself, who can control you, huh? I don't know. Maybe Rudy, huh? You thought that was funny too. Yeah, so did I. Hey, listen for a second. It's funny you called because I was just reading the paper today, and they had a big article about Mitch McConnell and his plan for the November election. Yeah, you call him Hong Kong Mitch. A lot of people call him Moscow Mitch. Yeah, it's McConnell is his last name. Yeah. Anyway, what he said, he's the guy that's been doing your dirty work for you. Well, okay, I'm sorry. Listen. Anyway, he said, don't focus on what you've done, but rather on what the Democrats have in store for us. You think that's a good plan? Okay, well, what do you think they're restoring the rule of law? They're going to bring that back? Environmental protection? They want to bring that back too? Holy justice? You got to be kidding. Justice? They want to bring justice back? Well, if the rule of law is gone, reason and logic? They're going to bring that back? What else? What else is that? Women's right to choose? Fair election. Fair elections? How are you going to get in? Universal voting by mail? It's over. You don't think this is good for America? Why not? Oh, I see. You were reading it was an audio book. You weren't reading it. Okay, it's an audio book. What's the name of it? Your summer camp? No, Mind Camp, not summer camp. I see. So you have an audio book by one of your favorite authors. Well, he made Germany exactly. You think he made it what it is today? You don't think Merkel had anything to do with it? What about the Marshall Plan? Well, listen, we can get into this another day because it's an interesting topic, the Marshall Plan and what happened in Germany. But in the end, things didn't work out for your buddy, okay? While it was listen, okay, don't get excited. Don't get excited, That's enough of you for the day. I said don't call me every day, okay? So let's hold this off at least for a few more days, okay? Okay, take care, Donald. Okay, bye-bye. Well, you just can't get away from this guy sometime. Listen, the other day I said I was going to do today's show about the Organic Twinkie Project, but I'm not. I just couldn't get it together to set up the camera and do the lighting, and I got to do everything outside where I have all this equipment in the other half of my underground cave here. So it's going to take a lot more energy than I thought. It only took me about a year to get this rig here together with the camera and everything, and so maybe we'll talk about the project at the end. Maybe we won't. We'll see. But we will get into it one of these days. Where I'm staying with this whole project right now is there's hardly anybody out there. I want to thank you very much for telling me to bring my increase the headshot. So I think I've got it. And Marty called in and helped me get the frame right. I hope the lights are okay. We'll see how things go. But there's no frills. There's no bells and whistles. There's no lower thirds. There's no over the shoulders. There's no front credit and back credits. I just hit record and do it live, and that's all I can handle at the moment. It's technically I am what you would call a a brain dead millennial. No, I used to refer to millennials as brain dead. No, I'm a brain dead senior citizen who just has a lot of trouble with a lot of this technical stuff. So we're just going to move ahead and we're going to focus on the paper. We're going to focus on the news stories, and maybe for this week and next week, I'm not really anxious to get any huge following. I just want to see if we can get the rhythm down to how do we go about this. So any suggestions would be greatly appreciated. If you need to use any nasty four-letter words or something like that, I prefer that you put ... after the first letter. I'll try to figure it out because this is YouTube, and we don't want to violate any of their standards. Today's paper. Yeah, I'm really a newspaper junkie. Let me go to the wide shot for a second. So this was today's paper, and opening too soon poses a deadly risk. The Senate is warned. That was sort of the lead story on the top of the page here, but it's sort of overshadowed. It's overshadowed by this Afghani little death thing that happened today. 2 people getting killed. Somehow the import of this got overshadowed by the Afghanistan story. A lot of people try to make out the New York Times that it's this liberal rag that sets out all day long to destroy Donald Trump. If you read enough of this paper, you will eventually come to the conclusion that, in fact, it's not a liberal rag at all. It's very, very middle of the road, very fair and balanced of all things. It is actually fair and balanced. We'll do a show someday about the left and the right and how, let's say, Mother Jones is, say, over here, and Fox is over here, and the New York Times is more in the middle. Mort Saul used to do this. That was his whole routine, and I was a huge Mort Saul fan. Today's paper, well, I say it had a trove of what I call segue stories, and a segue story to me is a story that's in the paper today that segues back to some other bigger issue story that I've already been writing about or dealing with or something like that. Well, on page A24 today, which the obituaries are just great lately, by the way, the obituaries, because of the increase in the number of people dying, the obituaries are now 2 or 3 pages sometimes. In fact, Sunday was huge. But this fellow didn't die from the virus, and he's 87. There's the shot of him on the page. This is on page A24 of today's paper, and it's Jacqueline Taylor Robinson. He's not a Frenchman. Jacqueline Taylor Robinson, and he's an architect and a passionate urbanist. Dies at 87. Well, when I showed you this little picture here, the close-up over here, I believe this is Stuyvesant Town, which is an urban village in New York City. I think it's north of 14th Street to 23rd Street, something like that, over on the east side. And it's the kind of thing that Robert Moses, the architect of Manhattan, who built all these huge projects and things like that, he would have been right in favor of this. In fact, Robert Moses is probably one of the, I wouldn't be surprised if he's in that picture right there in the back. But the story that I've been going with for years is Jane Jacobs. And Jane Jacobs, she wrote Cities and the Wealth of Nations, Dark Ages Ahead. She's one of my heroes from the 20th century. Jane Jacobs recognized the dehumanizing effects of living in large, tall buildings, 10, 20, 30-story buildings, crushed together in urban neighborhoods with very little open space below. So Jane Jacobs was, she loved the city, she loved the dance of the city, and her big thing was that if you had, say, she lived in Greenwich Village, so you have a block with brownstones, and you have brownstones on this one block, and the next block maybe has stores on the first level, and people are living on the second story. So there's maybe 2 stories, 3 stories. It's not too high, you know, it's sort of more like a European kind of look. Maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 stories at the most. But the dense retail area, the retail stores will be on the ground floor and people will be living above them. So what happens in a neighborhood like that is you have people out all during the day. The shop closes up at 5 or 6 o'clock. And there's people that are in the neighborhood now that live there that are still in the neighborhood. So there's people looking down at the street. There's people doing some normal shopping. There's people out and about doing regular activities. When you have a situation like that, you have less crime. You got less crowding together. People act more humanely. Jane Jacobs was literally responsible for Soho becoming Soho. And I'll talk about this on another show because it's a really long story. She was the Boston, the market in Boston, the markets in Seattle. She was very much responsible for most of these farmers markets all around the country, for some of these open spaces, for Faneuil Hall in Boston. Like I said, I'll talk about her later. Up against Robert Moses and why she was responsible for Soho becoming Soho. So that was one Segue story on 824. The other one was, this was sort of a cute story. Page 14 in today's paper. We'll swing around a little bit again. And the whole thing was about what New Yorkers are missing. Well, New Yorkers are missing what everybody's missing. Big deal. But the fourth item down was was The Crowds of Times Square by Al Sharpton. So Al Sharpton, he recalled being in heaven, coming into Times Square as a child. And he used to stroll around with his surrogate father, who was James Brown. But now Times Square is like a wasteland. He's got an office on 40th Street, right south of Times Square. He said, to me, it's a horror movie, like the world came to an end. I just want it back, don't we all? Well, for me, one of my stories that I will talk about is growing up as a cocktail lounge kid in New York. And I would be at my father's bar and hang out there and do this stuff. And then I would leave about 12, 1 o'clock when these Goombas came in. And I would walk down Times Square. I was 10 years old, 55, 54, 55, 56 in that era. And I would, by myself, walk right through Times Square, and I'd stop at the Metropole, and I'd stop here, and I'd stop there, and then I'd take the train home. So for me, Times Square has a whole growing up kind of a nice feel to it. I have some other interesting stories later on about Times Square. So growing up, cocktail lounge kid in New York, the mafia and the cops, Times Square. I'll do a little story about. I'll do a whole show about that some night. The last one was on page A19. That's once again in today's paper, A19, and we have the headline here at the bottom under the fold. You see that? Okay. It's senators accuse conservative society of undue influence on judges. Now, just last night, I think I mentioned it on the first or second show, the Powell Memo. Justice Powell writes what's known as the Powell Memo back in 1971. And it's a letter to the Chambers of Commerce. And basically, he's talking about the attack against the free market system, the capitalist free market system, by the students and the intellectuals. Most of you won't remember this because you weren't there, but you'll remember back to the 60s. You heard about the 60s. Well, during the 60s, the students were in the street. The students were being taught by professors who were thinkers, and a lot of them were very progressive. There's once you start to get into the thinking category, you lose most of your conservatives sort of drop out. You lose them en masse. It's amazing what happens when you apply logic and reason and law and justice and things like that. So the Powell Memo leads directly to, they basically encourage the formation of the Federalist Society. And this article is talking about how the Federalist Society is basically picking the judges. And the Federalist Society is a dark money, deep pocket, super right-wing, very, very extreme right-wing a group of people that's trying to reshape the entire country. And they're doing a really good job of it. They are really doing a good job of it. Way better job than anybody on the left is doing. They have, at this point, they have been all the justices that come in and get recommended for the Supreme Court, they go through various processes, and the Federalist Society vets them. Well, 2 of the Supreme Court justices and 43 of the 51 appellate court justices have all been vetted very highly by the Federalist Society. Well, the senators are trying to get a bill because they think that the Federalist Society has gotten a little bit too politically skewed, and they're not really fair at all. In fact, they're anything but fair. So they'd like to rectify that. The American Bar Association is the one that usually recommends, and they're one of the recommenders here. And as the opposition came into the senators wanting to eliminate the Federalists, the conservatives came in and said, well, then we shouldn't go with the American Bar Association either. And these people said, fine, put them both in the mix and let this panel figure out who is fair and who isn't fair, and we'll go by the results. So this is really a huge story, I think, and the transformation of the courts and the dominance of the Senate right now by the Republicans who gained control of the Senate, who stopped everything that Obama tried to do. I mean, they weren't a legislative body; they were a disruptive body, a stop anything body, and they said this publicly. They didn't hold anything back. They said it publicly. They said, well, we don't care what he says. If he put out a bill that they had put out the week before, but it has his name on it, they would oppose it. It's simple as that. And that's what went on for the whole 8 years this guy is in power. He tried to be Obama tried to reach out and shake hands and let's come to compromise. Compromise was not in their vocabulary on any level. And then to top it off, today we have Bill Barr. Bill Barr is the guy who basically whitewashed the Iran-Contra scandals that were happening. So he's been around for quite a while. He's been around since the 80s, this guy. And Bill Barr is a huge monarchist. A presidential power should be increased. The president shouldn't be subject to these legislative bodies or these courts. The president should be a strong leader. There shouldn't be an equal bodies of government. And these guys consider themselves conservatives, right? Well, the whole point of conservatism, if you go way back, you wind up having a king. The conservatives, when the American Revolution was happening, were in favor of the king. They were the Whigs. So that's where we're at today. We've got these ultra-white, right-wing, they don't even know they're monarchists, the people in the street. Literally monarchists. And they're trying to take down our entire system, which is what they are very, very, very well succeeding at. I'll tell you, they are. They are, well, you read the paper. If you read the paper, the environmental laws every day are getting eviscerated, and the rule of law. I mean, when you've got people talking about the rule of law as a fundamental concept which is being destroyed, you know that the people in power, the only thing they care about is themselves and more power and more money. So we're going to end that little one there. That's 1, 2, 3 stories, and we're about almost 20 minutes in. I'm going to give you one reference to go to before I get to what I think is actually the biggest story. But in the Independent Journal today, on page 8, there's an Associated Press story. And this is, what's interesting about this is that it didn't make it to the New York Times. No, it didn't. It wasn't in the Times. Now, maybe it'll be in tomorrow, but let me give you a shot at it. 100 children with illness linked to virus. Holy mackerel. It's a pretty scary thing watching your child be hooked up to all these wires and IVs, and there's nothing you can do. In my opinion, right now, I would not let your child out in public. This story started to break about 2 weeks ago, and it originally broke in England, then parts of Europe. They're separated now. And then finally in New York, and it started on Long Island, and originally were 30 cases and 1 death. Well, now there's over 100 illnesses in the New York metropolitan area, and I think we're up to 3 deaths. And these kids, you know, it's a typical story. The kid starts to develop some mild symptoms. They take him to the doctor. They think he has an appendicitis. They send him home. Go check out your pediatrician. The symptoms get a little worse. They don't think it's too much. Don't worry about it. The symptoms trying to get really bad, and finally he comes into the hospital. They let him in, and they find out he has a mysterious inflammatory syndrome thought to be related to the virus. And the word they're using, it's similar to a Kawasaki disease for you doctors and nurses and medically informed people out there. The reason this is such a big story is, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, the virus that we are involved with right now is a global pandemic. Now, there have been coronaviruses for the last, 20 years, 20 odd years, I think. And they keep getting worse. Each one gets a little worse. Now, let's say the Earth is alive. Let's say the planet is actually alive. Let's say this whole thing is a living, breathing organism. Now, some people think it is, and some people don't. Some people think a rock is a rock, and that's the end of it. There's no life in that rock. There's no life in that dirt. There's no life in that sea, in that water. Doesn't matter. There's no life in that animal. We can do whatever we want to it. We can torture it and cut it up and eat it. We can do everything we want with the entire. We can destroy the whole planet. It's a concept within a lot of Christian thinking called divine destruction. It's real lunacy. The fact is, the planet is alive, and the planet is talking to us regularly. The virus got our attention. Climate change has got a lot of head people's attention, a lot of talk about it, but let's get back to the close-up here. Climate change has not moved anybody to change a whole lot of our actual actions, how we act on the planet, what we do. The virus comes along, it shuts the whole thing down. Well, suddenly the air is clearer, the water is actually cleaner, except for that little weird thing down in LA. And that's another story, the fluorescence. But the stopping or the limiting of human activity and the limiting of people traveling all over the place and visiting everything, and we're not using your car. You haven't, half the people out there haven't used half the gasoline they used to use. The gas stations aren't. There's no lines at the gas station. All over the planet, things are looking environmentally better, while we are not looking better. The Europeans are taking care of their people way better than we are, and their economy way better than we are. We, the John Wayne cowboy American mentality, the pick yourself up by your own bootstraps. They forgot to include the straps when they sold you the boots. That's the problem with that one. We've got 5% of the people on the planet, and we produce 25 to 30% of the pollution on the planet. Gee, that's a funny figure. It sounds a lot like the virus. The virus we have. Gee, what's the number? Let me check it over here. Oh, I think we have 4.5% of the population. Once again, 4.5% of the population. We have 30 to 35% of the cases. We have the same population to climate ratio as we have population to death ratio from the virus. The virus has mutated itself up to the point where it has become what it has become, which seems to be impossible to find a vaccine for. Well, not impossible. We eventually will, but it might be a year from now, maybe 6 months. And even when we do, it's already starting to mutate. So the only group of people who are The young, who were really totally not affected by the virus were the really young kids. The younger you were, it seemed like you were the least affected by it. The older people were the most affected by it. Fox News and Hannity and a couple of these other screwballs just a month ago were literally laughing at the idea that old people were expendable. This would be as the nursing home story was breaking, which has now been overshadowed by the meatpacking industry story. As the nursing home story was breaking, these guys were joking about it, thinning out the herd. Don't worry, they're just old people. Who cares? Well, if it's your mother who's one of those old people, then you wind up caring. But if it's just those other people, then you don't care, you know? That's the way a lot of these people think. The virus mutated and became what it is, and it stops the whole planet. The younger you were, the less you were affected. But there was affecting down there. Well, suddenly, the kids, the really young kids, and I mean young, 0 to 6, those are the ones that are being affected with this mutation here. So right now, today, it's only 100 cases in New York City. There are other cases popping up all around the country. Imagine that. So it seemed to start in Europe, who knows, wound up on Long Island. Now it's all over the metropolitan area, and it's bouncing up everywhere. This virus is not going away. It is not going away easily. It is not going to quietly dissipate into the night. This virus is a wake-up call. It is time to change everything about everything we do. We need to really get our acts together and look at things very differently. Well, it's only about 5 minutes left, so let me just do one little bit of tea. We're going to do a little bit of tea, and I'm going to put this little other shot on I have here. Look at that. I was able to hit my finger. That's one of the marvelous things about this little camera. One of the marvelous things. There's a few things that aren't, but that's one of the marvelous things. And what you can see is the tea. It's over here on my left. That's my little tea setup. Teacup. My Yixing teapot to brew the tea in. The hot water, tea. And the tea I'm using, this is a really cool. Now, I would not recommend this to too many people. You have to like smoke. Whoops. Left is right, right is left, up is down. Okay? This is what's called a black tea. It's hardly black. It's a Lapsang Souchong. Lapsang Souchong. Lapsang Souchongs are smoked. So just like you have a salmon that's been smoked and lox that are smoked, you know, with smoky flavor. Well, it's got a strong flavor to it. Smoked. It's just sort of a not terribly exciting looking, but a really, really black tea. A lot of black teas aren't so black. A lot of black teas wind up being more golden. But this tea is really black. I like this tea a lot. It's a real it's a real kick you in the butt in the morning kind of tea. You can steep. I didn't put any tea in there, and why didn't I put any in there? Because I already had this morning. My first steeping was this morning. Second, third steeping. So I'm going to wake up the leaves, put a little hot water on them, so that the next steeping is going to be the really delicious version of this. Now we're going to let this sit in this little Yixing teapot. Let me just. You know, even just putting a tiny bit of water on this, there's enough flavor in there that it produces quite a delicately light, yet a robust and slightly crisp, but that little smoky back. But not too much smoke here because most of that's been out of it. There'll be more as I let it steep for a minute. So we're going to almost wrap this up here. I'm going to read this tiny, tiny little poem, and I'm running... Okay, half a minute. Kay Ryan, brand new book, Synthesizing Gravity. Local artist, local poet. She was America's Poet Laureate for a couple of years running, a few years back. She's got this tiny poem in here by a Stevie Smith. I'm just going to read this thing. And it's a little bit about what we do here. He told his life story to Mrs. Courtley. who was a widow. "Let us get married shortly," he said. "I am no longer passionate, but we can have some conversations before it's too late." Well, that's what we're doing right now. We're having some conversations before it's too late. This was the conversation for tonight. Let's take a little of the tea. It sat there for maybe like a half a minute. See you next time we do this. Delicious.